Back with more Live from the Heartland. This is Michael James. I'm here with Tom Clark, and that was Tom Paxson doing a tune, We Didn't Know, which takes us through U.S. history and people apparently not knowing what was going on when it was really going on in their face. So, now we're going to turn to our guests. We have two guests today. Our first guest is Daniel Biss. He is an Illinois state senator from the 9th District. I think that's Evanston.
That's right, just north of the People's Republic of Riders Park.
Aha, that's good. Good morning to you, Daniel.
Hey, good morning, Michael.
So I was grilling you a little bit earlier. I had seen your brother on TV. He is a musician. Turns out you're a mathematician. I was curious to know where you guys grew up and what family life was like for you, with a guy who becomes a mathematician, then a politician, and another a brother, a sibling who is a hotshot keyboardist.
Yeah, so I am an absolute outcast black sheep. My brother plays the piano, my parents are both violinists, my grandmother was a cellist, my other grandmother was a piano teacher, my uncle is like a composer or a pianist, and then they got stuck with me. So I went into math. I fell in love with math as a teenager, like any teenager does, and then I found myself teaching at the University of Chicago, starting in 2002, so about 6 months before we went to war in Iraq. And I just saw that the world was spinning out of control, and I was hanging out in the math department and solving problems that I thought were really interesting and maybe only 6 other people in the world cared about. And I thought maybe I should do something that's more directly engaged with social justice, and found myself in the legislature.
You're in the legislature, first as a state rep and now as a state senator.
That's right.
Oh man, I had this question that I lost. Tom, you got one?
So I want to follow up by saying, so what's it like when you actually get into office and your evenings and your weekends have already had to adjust in order to do a campaign, and now you're in this wonderfully intense intellectual discussion about policy and how to make the state better when you go to Springfield, right?
Sure. Look, as far as the evenings and the weekends, I don't know how to say this in a way that it doesn't sound a little bit corny, but I represent 217,000 people who live in my district. I am their voice in the state senate. Sometimes we vote about things like what should be the fee for the license to be able to trap river otter, but sometimes we vote on marriage equality and tax policy and child care. And we have these debates, and then a bell rings and I push a green or a red button and the state changes a little bit on behalf of those 217,000 people, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have a chance to do it. And if that means that I have 217,000 people to listen to on the evenings and weekends, then I'm happy to do that. Now, the debates in Springfield are sometimes very intellectual, and they're sometimes very political, and they're sometimes just completely silent or dishonest. But the outcomes matter in people's lives. So it's almost, the question I ask isn't how intellectual was the debate. The question I ask is how can we move the ball in the right direction and actually make the state work for people who've been left behind for generations now.
I think that one of the challenges we face is out of your 217,000 constituents, maybe only half voted in the last election because it was a presidential year, and maybe only a third before that. So you have to pay a lot of attention to those active voters. But you want the others to be along for the ride, or at least not be opposing you as you're trying to move the state incrementally. What's that dynamic like between the really committed who are going to be on your back all the time, and maybe a half to 2/3 of the voters who have to worry about making next month's rent, and they don't think anything good's coming out of Springfield, so they kind of ignore it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Evanston is we may not be Rogers Park, but it's a very activist community, and so there's a large chunk of people who I hear from all the time, interact with on a weekly or more frequent basis, but that's of course a small minority. And the thing about state government is it's a little bit hard to pay attention to. It's not covered that meticulously in the news, it's hard to track what's actually going on, it's hard to get good, straight information about it, and so state legislators have historically just kind of hidden, have done their own thing, come back home to the district, kind of told a very simplistic picture about how they wanted to give the impression that things were, and then not really been subject to a lot of scrutiny. So what I try to do is be out and visible in the community and honest and direct and straight with people, ask people to hold me accountable, vote against me if that's what they think is the appropriate thing to do, and get the information out there. But it's tricky, not only because, as you said, a lot of folks don't vote, but a lot of folks who do vote may not be aware of the number of issues that affect them that are decided in Springfield rather than or in addition to Washington and the city government.
Before I was going to ask how your math prepared you for a life in politics.
Well, I will say a couple of things. First of all, I wasn't just a math problem solver, I was also a teacher. So I would be in front of classrooms of people who had different backgrounds and different knowledge bases, and I had to figure out how to read the room, understand where people were, and figure out a creative or new way to meet people where they were and get the point across. And it's not the case that I'm literally a teacher anymore, but man, that skill is useful every single day.
No, I've seen you speak. You are a teacher.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
You served both in the House and in the Senate in Springfield, and I'm wondering, having been in both of those two bodies, what you see as the leadership difference and styles of Madigan and Cullerton.
Gosh, that almost sounds like a leading question, Michael.
Me? A leading question?
Not possible. Not possible. I misinterpreted. No, it's true though. There's a lot more freedom and openness in the Senate. There's a much more open flow of information, right? So if I have a question about what's on Cullerton's mind, I call his cell phone and he will call me back and we'll have a direct conversation. I may agree with him, I may not, but I have an open line of contact there, which is incredibly helpful. And he sees his job as trying to understand what the members of the Senate Democratic Caucus believe in, care about, want to accomplish, and then seek to help them to do that. Things are a little bit more tightly controlled in the House.
So what happened with the grand bargain that looked promising between the Republican and Democratic leadership in the Senate? Really was done apparently without the governor or the speaker being very directly involved. And then this week it just the wheels seemed to come off.
Yeah, listen, Tom, the question is how directly was or wasn't the governor involved, right? Back in late 2016, Senate President Cullerton and Republican leader Christine Radogno started working on a compromise. And, there were things in it that I sure as hell didn't like, and probably things that others didn't like, but it was an effort to get out of this grotesque and vicious and destructive stalemate and actually get a state budget. And they did it initially without Madigan or Rahner, but at the end of the day, when it came time to take a vote, Rahner started meeting one-on-one with Republican members of the Senate and threatening them, telling them, if you vote yes, I'm going to go after you in a primary, I'm going to take you out, I'm going to get rid of you, I'm going to finance your political destruction. And it was another piece of evidence that you can negotiate with a Republican leader in the House or the Senate, but at the end of the day, the strings are being pulled by Rahner.
So Rahner clearly is not really that interested in governing, but deconstruction, much like the new regime in D.C.
Yeah, listen, Rahner's an ideologue, right? Rahner, and you got to ask yourself, why did the dude run for governor? I mean, he had a luxurious, comfortable life, 9 houses, everything that the person could ever ask for, and he spends tens of millions of dollars all to have the privilege of living in Springfield and dealing with people like me, right? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? And the answer that I've come to is that he is just desperate to bust the unions. He wants to be Scott Walker, only he wants to go further. He wants to be Rick Snyder from Michigan, only to go further. And so the question he's asking himself isn't how do we get out of the budget problem, isn't what's the right policy on reproductive freedom, isn't how do we make a tax policy that's fair, it's how do we break labor unions, because that's the long-term plan of the billionaire class to further enrich themselves. And so he's using everything in government, whether it's the budget or anything else, as just a bargaining chip to get to his real goal. And the problem is his real goal is dangerous and destructive, and if we allow him to achieve that, the long-term consequences for economic fairness in Illinois will be just devastating.
In the meantime, NGOs like his own wife's House Prevention Fund can't get paid for services already rendered.
Oh no, it's terrible. I mean,
I can't imagine the pillow talk. It blows me away.
I've chosen not to imagine the pillow talk.
Okay, that's probably smart for your mental health. You came into prominence, I think, because of a series of videos you did trying to explain to maybe that disengaged voter why things like budgets and revenue sources are important. How did you decide to take that approach? What was the reaction to these, which I think you can still find online, although my guess is you're going to have to update them soon.
I hope I have to update them soon because I hope we make some progress in Springfield. Yeah, you know, about a year ago I realized that here's the situation, right? The Illinois government's got real problems. We've got a huge amount of debt, worst credit rating, we keep on incarcerating our governors. There are real problems. And Bruce Rahner came to office saying, hey, I'm going to shake up Springfield, I'm going to bring back Illinois, I'm going to fix it. And then he introduced his so-called reform agenda to fix it, which was an awful, union-busting, far-right ideological agenda. And the Democrats, for the most part, were spending our time saying, hey, Rahner, your agenda is terrible. Which it is. But of course there's underlying real problems, and we ought to also be proposing our own solutions. And so I thought that in addition to fighting the Rahner agenda, I would start to lay out some solutions about what a fair tax system looks like, about what a government that invests in people can do by making college affordable, making childcare affordable, investing in infrastructure. And so you can find these videos at roadbackillinois.com or on my Facebook page, and it's just meant to say, listen, there are things that we can do that are good for the state, that solve our problems, that are not just not far right, but are progressive, consistent with a progressive vision, and actually will lift up the working poor and the middle class.
You're listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM from Loyola University here in Chicago. You've been hearing Dan Biss, who's an Illinois State Senator, and we're about to be joined by Brian Gladstein from Common Cause to weigh in on these things. I know that Michael wanted to ask about your own political future, but let's start with who's going to be going up against Mr. Rahner. Do we have a challenger? We have at least two announced, in Chris Kennedy and Mr. Pawar. But how do you see the tea leaves?
Well, here's what I see. In 2014, Bruce Rahner, billionaire businessman who thought he had all the answers, was able to storm into the governor's office, and the consequences have been a disaster for Illinois. And then in 2016, Donald Trump, a maybe billionaire businessman who thought he had all the answers, stormed into the presidency, and the results are terrifying for the country. There are some Democrats who say that's what we need. We just need to do that because that's apparently the way to get elected nowadays, and if we want to beat Rahner, we've got to just emulate that. I would say that's not working. I would say we have a system where a political machine and a billionaire class have controlled government for their own benefit. They're making decisions about us without us there at the table. And what we need is a progressive vision and someone who's willing to lay that out in a clear, bold way, not attach themselves to the Democratic political machine, but attach themselves to the progressive energy that's out there in Illinois, and use that to build a movement that not only will beat Bruce Rahner in 2018, but really transform Illinois government.
I was wondering about 2018 and what you think. I mean, there must be some both Senate races and House races downstate and in other parts of Illinois that the Democrats think they could get. Is there effort in that already for people to, pick candidates, to get campaigns going in those? Because we don't quite have the majority, even though we have a majority in the House and Senate, it's not quite foolproof because there's a couple of people who seem to have flipped.
Well, that's right. So in the Senate you need 30 votes for a majority, 36 for a supermajority. We've got 37, and so we can pass what we need to pass, and we could likely override the governor's vetoes. Now in the House, they need 60 votes for a majority. They have 67, but they don't have the 71 you need to override the governor's veto, and so we're stuck. And so Senate and House races in the 2018 elections will be very, very important. There's some opportunities around the state. I think of, for example, a Quad Cities district that had a Democrat representing it in the Senate for a very, very long time until the 2014 elections. We ought to win that seat back, and there are other seats in the suburbs and the collar counties as well that should be competitive. It's going to be really, really important. But the governor's race is also going to be crucial, if anything more crucial, and here's why. The winner of this next governor's race will be governor after the next census, when the new maps are drawn. And if Bruce Rahner is able to draw the legislative maps for the 2020s, then we're going to be a right-to-work state. We're going to get rid of collective bargaining in the public sector. We're going to become a state in the model of Scott Walker's Wisconsin, and once you go there, it's almost impossible to come back. So there is a lot at stake in the 2018 gubernatorial election.
Okay, so the people we know are thinking about it. We already have, Kennedy has announced that he's running. Prewar, the alderman, has announced that he's running. There's talk about Pritzker running. And there's rumor that you are interested in running.
I've heard that.
Would you like to address that?
What would be your timetable if you were to decide to throw your hat in the ring?
It would be soon, and here's why. I'm not going to run and then outspend J.B. Pritzker. I'm probably not even going to run and outspend Chris Kennedy. But this is a moment to build a political movement. And so if this is something that's worth doing, it's worth doing by spending real time in communities and neighborhoods and living rooms across the state to build out that grassroots movement. And that's got to start soon. So I'll be making a final decision and a public announcement in the coming weeks. And if I do it, I'll obviously be all in to build that movement. If I don't, I'll be all in to find a different candidate who will.
So it could be Daniel versus the Goliaths.
How biblical.
It is a good name for a band, too.
Excellent name for a band. So if things work out and we want to have a band in residence in the governor's office, that'll be what we'll call it.
So off of that, and maybe a pundit who will react to it, we like to do a little musical interlude with our good buddy Corky Siegel, who's going to be in a benefit for Common Cause this coming week. Nolan, why don't you take it away? We'll hear a little bit of a piece that Corky Siegel will be releasing in April. So this is actually a premiere preview of The Sky Will Fall from his Blues Chamber work.